Everyone, and welcome to this month's webinar, which is about the employment landscape under the new Labour government following the general election back in July. Just to let you all know that a copy of the slides are going to be sent out to you all afterwards in the coming days. So, as usual, we like to do our introductions. I'm Victoria Templeton, HR Knowledge Manager here at HR Solutions, and I'm joined this morning by Sue Watson. Sue's our Operations Director, and together we're going to take you through this topic and take your questions. We've got lots of you that have joined us today, which is great. So, as usual, we have placed you all on mute, but we do want your involvement in the webinar. And so we'll do that by inviting you to ask us questions. And on the screen now, you'll see an image of what your GoToWebinar question panel looks like. So simply type in your question, and then we'll aim to read out and answer as many as we can at the end. If it isn't possible, then we'll follow up with you afterwards. And another way in which we would like to get you all involved is through the use of polls. So when you know that we're about to run one, you'll see this slide. We find polls are really helpful, not only for the running of the webinar, but actually we find that it helps everyone gain an idea of what other businesses are doing or what they're thinking on a particular topic. They are confidential. We just know, obviously, the numbers of how the voting is coming in. So I'm just going to run through the agenda, and first of all I'm going to take you through what we're expecting to see this current parliamentary year as what was set out in the King's speech back in July. And then I'll follow up with talking through what you can start doing now to prepare for the changes ahead. I'm then going to talk about other areas that the Labour Party have committed to as set out in their manifesto, which is their 5-year plan. And then finally, we'll be looking at just some of the legislative changes that are still to come in force this year. And we'll end with taking your questions and answers. So we're going to run a poll now. We've got 3 actually, and it's really just to sort of understand, I guess, everybody's understanding of the topic and type of organisation you work for. So the first poll is really just to understand how much do you know about what Labour are committing to, particularly in this current parliamentary year. So not much at all, a little, or you're aware of the changes. And just keep it open for a little longer.
I think we're just about there now, so I'll close that poll and share those results.
Okay, brilliant. So the majority of you know a little bit, but only the headlines, and then a few of you not much at all, and 13% of you are aware of the changes. So I think on that, just to say that we are awaiting more information. It's very early on in the new government, but obviously from our point of view as a HR consultancy firm, you know, we obviously are up to date with our research, understand what the latest developments are, so we'll be able to share our thoughts and expectations and what kind of is the talk, if you like. And then we've got a second poll now that's really just to understand your organisation, and really that's the size of it first of all. So are you a small organisation, medium or large? Okay, let's see. So good to see that we've got lots of you from over the 3 different types of organisations, and I think the extent of the changes we're going to talk about will have varying levels of impact. Obviously, the larger organisation has more infrastructure and set up to be able to take on board the changes. Smaller businesses obviously will have different challenges as well. So you'll gain an idea of that as we talk you through. And then just a final quick question, and that's around whether your organisation is unionised. Okay.
There we go. So big majority
Brilliant.
not.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Because there are some changes around trade unions, etc. So brilliant. Thank you for that. And I'm going to move on with the slides. And really, the next section is all about the King's Speech. And really, back on July the 17th, I think it was, the King's Speech set out basically the government's commitment to what the priorities are in this first parliamentary year. So we know that they're prioritising all of those things that were in the manifesto. And one bill that was announced during the speech was the new Employment Rights Bill. Now, this bill is about introducing a commitment to making work pay and would legislate to introduce a new deal for working people, to ban exploitative practices and enhance payment rights. And there are lots and lots of different ways in which the government are proposing to achieve this. So I've broken down the areas of change under this bill and grouped them into 5 main employment areas. The first one being is around your employment contracts and working arrangements. So what we're going to see under this new bill is that they're going to ban exploitative zero-hour contracts. Now, if you've been following the news, you'll be aware that actually there's been a shift in the wording of this. So probably, I don't know, last year perhaps we were hearing that Labour have always been keen to scrap zero-hour contracts. Actually, what now is the wording, and what has come out in the briefing material around the speech is that they're looking to ban exploitative zero-hour contracts. So they're trying to strengthen employment rights and protections, and ensure that you don't have those small organisations that are abusing the nature of those types of contracts of employment. So they will still, I suspect, obviously be in operation, but how that will work will be quite different to ensure that their people aren't exploited. They're also talking about within every contract there being a legal obligation for employers to provide reasonable notice of work schedules and wages for shifts that are cancelled at short notice. And they're going to make further enhancements to the flexible working rules. So in understanding this, from what we have read in terms of the supporting briefing notes, it talks about the government adapting and building on the recently implemented changes to flexible working, and that they would ensure flexibility is a genuine default from day one, except when it is not reasonably feasible. There's no further clarity on what not reasonably feasible means, and also we know even from April this year, people have already got flexible working rights to ask for it, certainly from day one of employment. So it's not entirely clear what we mean or what they mean by reasonably feasible. My thoughts, and from what I've been reading on it, is at the moment, the current legal test at tribunal, when there's a claim under the regulations, when an employer is refusing a flexible working request, at the moment, that has to be for one of those statutory reasons that we're all familiar with, the inability to reorganise work, etc. What perhaps may be changing is that test, and so not only would an employer have to satisfy those statutory reasons, but actually the test of reasonableness must be met, as in, the decision making for why you're refusing is reasonable. That's my interpretation from what I'm reading. As I said, we've got it as a day one right already. So perhaps it's about the burden of how you bring and test that in the tribunals, i.e. making it easier for employees to claim. The second area of the bill sees developments in the family leave area. So, for instance, they're going to make changes to parental leave by making it day one entitlement for all workers. Again, what we don't know is what is meant by parental leave. So is it the term in the broader sense, i.e. it includes all forms of family parental leave that currently have a qualifying service, so paternity leave and the 26-week service, shared parental leave, or is it just specifically for the parental leave, you know, that entitlement where you can take up to so many weeks in a 12-month period, where, again, there's that qualifying service. I suspect it probably is going to be that broad parental leave term, because I don't know how it would work fairly if all the other forms of leave still have your 26-week service. But as I said, in terms of the wording and what was communicated, they're talking about parental leave. We're also going to see bereavement leave for all workers from day one of employment. We don't know at this stage if it's going to be paid or unpaid. And a huge change is, or a further development, if you like, in protection, is around making it unlawful to dismiss an employee in their first 6 months from returning after maternity leave. So they're strengthening the workers' protection rights for somebody that's just had a baby and coming back into employment. The third area of the bill that focuses on industrial relations. So appreciate not as many of you are unionised. Obviously, things can change, evolve. You might get requests to be recognised. And so this is the third area. Labour are going to abolish, first of all, the law that came into force last year that allows employers to set minimum service levels during strike action. And there's going to be a new duty on employers to inform workers of their right to join a union. And they're talking about the new rights to access a union within the workplace, which is more about how it's regulated and managed when organising trade union activities and in recruitment of when you're trying to engage with union reps. There's also going to be reforms to various aspects of existing trade union legislation. So they're looking to remove restrictions on trade union activity, making ballots simpler and more flexible, as well as prevent being able to replace striking workers with agency workers that was originally unlawful, and then it was brought back in. And then the threshold of support required under union recognition to a simple majority. So I think there's going to be some big changes. We've not seen a lot of changes in regards to industrial relations in some time, but they're looking at ultimately, as well as simplifying the trade union statutory recognition process. I think once we've got more detail and understand exactly what's changing, I think this is an area that definitely is going to warrant a webinar to shed light on it more, because obviously it's going to get a lot of attention. The fourth area is going to be around changes to pay and benefits, which will impact all organisations clearly, for what I'm just going to go through. But I think this is one where it's going to have a huge, bigger impact on those smaller businesses. So, for example, they're going to be removing the lower earnings threshold, first of all, for SSP. They're going to remove SSP waiting days, so it's from day one. And aside from the sick pay changes, they're also going to be changing the national minimum wage. So they're going to remove those age bandings. So everybody's going to be caught up in one band. So if you've got a predominantly younger workforce, or you recruit a lot of school leavers, that will obviously, you'll have bigger increases because you've got more people to capture in the band. And also they're looking at changing the way they determine the national minimum wage levels each year. So there's an independent body that does that, but they've tasked that body with ensuring that they include the cost of living as being one of the factors for when they're determining the national minimum wage levels that they then recommend to the government. So that's going to be a significant change financially. And finally, they're going to make changes to how employment law is enforced. So a huge, huge development is making unfair dismissal a day one right. At present, as you know, you need to have 2 years service with an employer in order to bring a claim for unfair dismissal. Labour are going to scrap that. They've also said at high level that there are obviously indications that probation processes can still be in operation, but any dismissal would have to be, of course, subject to any of those probation rules. So that clearly is going to have ramification for employers in terms of generally how you manage probations, that first year of employment. If any of you perhaps utilise short service process for that group of your workers who have the fewer than 2 years service, then it's going to significantly impact your working practices and perhaps advice if you're in the HR profession. We're also going to see further restrictions on the practice of fire and rehire. So this is where an employee or employees are dismissed and re-engaged on new terms. So hopefully you'll know that back in July, the previous government did introduce a new code of practice around fire and rehire. And what we know from Labour is that they want to go further with that code. They don't think it goes far enough. This code of practice is relevant to whenever you're looking to change terms and conditions, and when you're at that point where you think that you're going to have to dismiss and re-engage in order to put through your proposed new terms. It's really a key document. So it'll be interesting to see how they further enhance that code of practice. And finally, we're going to see the introduction of a new Fair Work agency. So we're going to have that separate independent body that will be helping to enforce employee rights and protections. We don't have obviously the details around what that will look like, but they're going to bring that in. And as I said, these are all things that are coming in the first parliamentary year under this current King's Speech. So there's going to be many changes ahead. These ones are just those that we've explored under the one bill, which is the Employment Rights Bill. But there are other bills that are going to come in very, very soon that we're discussing in the King's Speech that will have an impact on employment as well. So, well, first of all, we're going to see the Equality, Race and Disability Bill. That's coming in, and that's about enshrining in law the full right to equal pay for ethnic minorities and people with disabilities, making it easier to bring unequal pay claims, because currently equal pay legislation is more focused on targeting sex discrimination. So this bill is all about proposing to expand this to include race and disability. And there's also going to become a new duty, legal duty on large employers. So those of you on today's webinar with over 250 employees, then there will become that requirement to produce ethnicity and disability pay gap reports. And then there's two other bills that are more broader bills, not necessarily just employment related, but they will have an impact on employment. So the first one being the Digital Information and Smart Bill, Smart Data Bill. And that is all about how data can support economic growth and create that modern digital government that will improve people's lives. So it's looking to improve current data protection laws so that it gives greater protection to the Information Commissioner Office, gives them greater powers, to introduce legislation, to place requirements on those who develop artificial intelligence models. So AI is going to be a key focus in making sure that it is managed ethically, morally and legally. And then there's going to be a statutory basis to the digital verification services. So these are the services that enable individuals to participate in secure and trusted digital identification. So you'll already probably be familiar because they're already used in the legal right to work checking process. So this part of the bill will basically give it these organisations that statutory basis. So it's a far-reaching bill, not just an employment bill, but as you'll gain from that, there will be an impact on employment practices and processes. And then finally, there's a children's wellbeing bill. So I don't know if any of you on this webinar work in the education sector particularly, but this is, again, not a specific employment bill, but it goes on to include proposals that would impact employment, in particular aspects to do with safeguarding. And it's about making changes to current laws that would enable serious teacher misconduct to be investigated. So regardless of when the misconduct occurred, regardless of the setting in which the teacher was employed, and even regardless of how the misconduct was uncovered, there's going to be new laws in place to allow employers to enable serious teacher misconduct to be investigated and managed. So there's a lot going on. Those bills in particular, as I said, are ones relevant to employment. We are going to see a lot of change, especially, as I said, in the first parliamentary year. And I guess it can feel overwhelming where to start in getting your head around it all. So I'm just going to sort of share with you now my ideas as to what you can start doing now to think about it. And so I guess the first thing is around auditing your existing working practices, because really you need to look at what you currently do, how you currently operate. When we have that further information from the bill to understand the more detail of it, then it's looking about what the gaps are between what you're currently doing and what you need to be doing in the future. And then from there, you can formulate your plan and prioritize that plan. So that's going to be a key activity from the outset. Clearly, from what we've discussed, there's going to be changes needing to be made to your contracts of employment. If you engage in workers, then those worker agreements that you have in place. So it's important that you carry out a review of those key employment documents. And then, because many of the changes are going to have that financial impact, so if you think about your SSP, you think about the national minimum wage, we suggest you start to look at carrying out some scenario planning and financial forecasting, just to understand what's going to influence and how it's going to influence your organisation and therefore how you're going to operate. Whilst we still need some specific details about what new SSP rates are going to be or what national minimum wage is going to be, you can do an element of scenario planning. So looking at of your workforce, how many individuals are currently in the younger age bracket for the national minimum wage, and what would it mean to you financially if they were then going to be in the adult national minimum wage, for example. Or it might be that you look at your last 12 months sickness absence history and do some scenario planning and forecasting of, okay, well, what if the rules around SSP had changed for that data and it was from day one of sickness, for example. So start looking at the financial side of things, forecasting wherever you're possible, because that will help you for your budgeting going into next year. For those of you that are unionised, just review your current existing working practices and your relationships with your trade unions. Understand the changes that are coming ahead in terms of when we know more from the Employment Rights Bill, which will be the bill that will set out the detail. Think about what you need to then do to be aligned with the changes coming in. And obviously engaging with your unions and engaging with your workforce is going to be vital. We also advise as well generally around engaging and consulting with your workforce whenever there's organisational change to policies and working practices, because you want to keep them as engaged as possible throughout this period of change. The other thing is, you know, there's going to probably be a lot of news going around, things going to be in the spotlight, and actually if you're just up front and saying we're currently developing a policy on XYZ, you know, they feel that they're engaged with their employer and they're ahead in terms of knowing what's happening for them personally. And then finally, and probably the most important in terms of when everything goes live, is about training your employees. It is fundamental. So when, you know, if we're going to see these changes in trade union laws, think about different groups of your workforce. So if you do have a small HR team or a couple of individuals that are the points of contact, think about specific training for them on industrial relations, and because it's an area that hasn't necessarily had a lot of change in recent years, and it's going to necessarily be a fundamental consideration moving forward. Also think about your training in terms of you need specific line management training as well as general employee training, depending on what it is that you're rolling out. So factor in obviously your budgeting, training costs and things like that, and just think about your training needs for the year ahead there. So there are our thoughts at this stage. Obviously, we've got limited information. As more information comes through, you can revise and revisit your plans to make sure you're preparing fully. I know that we, as an organisation, we communicate all the developments and employment updates on our main website, so you can keep in touch with that. Sign up to our newsletter, which is free, of course, and obviously just keep in touch with us for developments. But these are the things that you can start think about now to get ready. So I'm going to just have a break from talking for a moment, and we're going to hand over to Sue because we've got 2 or 3 polls coming up now, which hopefully will be useful to find out how we're all going to move forward with this.
Okay, so the first poll we've got is which of these areas that Victoria's been talking about earlier do you think will impact your organisation the most? Clearly some real significant change about to happen, and I don't think there's any employer not going to be impacted at some level by the changes that are coming.
No, from what I've read I do a lot of reading of key barristers and that in the employment field, and you know, this is the biggest change in employment law in decades. Yeah, absolutely. It's really significant.
Okay, I think we've got the majority through now, so I'll close that poll. Quite interesting results there. Share the results.
Okay, yeah. So pay and benefits, that's not a surprise at all. Especially most of you on this webinar are small and medium-sized organisations, aren't, if I'm thinking correctly from the stats earlier. And 7% for industrial relations, yeah, that makes sense. Interesting, definitely interesting.
Very, yeah, okay.
And it touches the entire employee life cycle, doesn't it, all of these changes?
Absolutely. So, yes, how many of you are ahead of the game and started planning for these changes? It won't be long before we're all going into our budgeting for next year, so the next financial year.
And of course, we've got the budget, haven't we, coming up?
Yep.
Is that October?
October,
yeah.
We are expecting some of these to be some of the detail to be announced imminently, aren't we? In sort of October, because they really need to give notice for a lot of them. Yeah. Hopefully they'll be from April next year.
We'll come on to that on later in the webinar, because just explains kind of the process involved.
Okay, let's share those results. So it's quite a significant amount have, but also quite a number of us haven't, and it is hard when you don't know the detail, but there is quite a lot, as you said, that we
Yeah.
can do. So let's just have a look at the next.
And especially the more smaller organisations, it could be overwhelming for everybody, but I guess the smaller you are, it's like harder to sort of get your head around, and also devote the time and have the roles in place within your organisation to be doing all the planning.
Yeah, which leads nicely into the last poll in this section, I think. Is what kind of things would you want support? We're currently reviewing all of our work, you know, our workshops that we're going to provide, the tools, the resources, and we really want to be looking at stuff that you need. So this will just help us focus our attentions in the right areas, because obviously there's a lot to do. And it's hard to release some of it until we've got the detail.
Yeah, I think the next few weeks are going to be key.
Yeah.
I'll come on to that on the next slide.
Okay, so I'll close that one and share those results.
Yeah. So current contracts, absolutely, because it's your key employment documentation. And yeah, the audit in the first place is fundamental, because that's your starting point, isn't it?
Yeah. And the trade union relations, it's definitely going to come back on the table again.
Yeah.
In terms of just having to promote it, if you know, in the first place.
And I think if they're looking at simplifying union recognition processes, it could be that you might start getting requests from your workforce. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you for that, everybody. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And this is really just to, I guess, put it into some context around timeframes and procedure. So if we think what's involved in bringing the bills into becoming Acts of Parliament, and therefore how long it takes, I just wanted to sort of talk through the process. So Labour in the manifesto have committed to bringing in legislation in the first 100 days, and you probably will have heard that. But when they say legislation in the first 100 days, it doesn't mean it's all going to be in place, enforced within 100 days. So by calculations, we get to the 12th of October as being the 100 days, and that's starting from the Friday, the 5th of July, when they took, you know, they became government. But what that means itself is, as I said, it's not going to be in place at that point. It will be that bills will be published by that point, and there are many steps in order for that bill to become an act of law. So this means there can be several rounds of readings, debates, amendments to the bills, not just in the House of Commons, but also in the House of Lords, and it can go back and forth like ping pong ball. And once they've been through both houses, then that's when it gets passed to the monarch to be given that royal assent, so, and i.e. becomes an act of law. Then some bills that become acts can commence the day after it's become an act of law, but generally there's a period of time between something becoming an act and when it commences. And that's because there's often secondary legislation that's needed, or there's regulations that need to go to be introduced that provide the further detail about the mechanics of how that law will operate. And in some cases too, there will need to be associated documents like codes of practice, for example. So how quick these changes will come will depend on the business priorities of the government and Parliament. Obviously, external influences can impact on that. So as an example, we know in COVID pandemic, everything was put on the back burner because they had to focus on that external influence. So it all very much depends on priorities. Something that's quite straightforward and could perhaps be pushed through relatively quick. But if you think about the Employment Rights Bill that I've just spoken about, and all those different 5 areas about what it's looking to reform and change, it's actually lengthy and complex. And so my reading on it, and what I've been following externally is that it is going to be some time for that employment bill to actually come in and take effect. So we're looking at perhaps mid-2025 or even later, early in the autumn. But they've obviously committed it to being in this parliamentary year because they've made it as part of the King's Speech. So it's very difficult to second guess at this stage, but it was just, I guess, the key point is that even though they say the legislation is within 100 days, it's really for the bill to be introduced and for those processes to be in motion. So so that's kind of the outline of how the procedure will work. How are we doing for time? So this next part of the webinar is really just to highlight for your information other changes that the Labour Party have committed to, but yet they've not prioritised it for this current year. But it will be within their 5-year plan, the term that they're in government, they're in office. So you'll see lots of things here, and I'll just run through them. And as we work through the coming months, weeks, years, more information will be shared. But they're looking ultimately at introducing a statutory carers pay. So back in April, we had the new entitlement to leave, but obviously it's unpaid. They would want it paid. They want to create a single employment status. So rather having employee, worker, self-employed, they want it to either be employee or self-employed. They want to introduce a new statutory right for employees to have the right to disconnect from work. So you may have heard about that in the news recently. So that wasn't part of the King's Speech. So it's not an immediate priority, but it is something they want to develop. And that will basically mean employees would have the legal right to turn their computers and phone off at the end of the workday. And this practice is already becoming more commonly used in Ireland, Belgium. There are other countries, Australia, where they're developing it. They want to introduce a Race Equality Act. They want to focus on dual discrimination, which will allow workers to claim discrimination based on a combination of protected characteristics rather than two individual ones. And they're going to extend time limits for bringing tribunal claims from the 3 months to the 6 months. They want to make it tougher for employers to breach any tribunal orders, including personal liability for directors. And there has been a lot of talk in the news in the last year, 2 years, about menopause, the impact it has on the workplace. There's been always that question, should it become a protected characteristic or not? Well, Labour want to make sure that those employers who have more than 250 people employed, that there's that menopause action plan in place. Doesn't mean to say other employers can't do it, but they're making it as a requirement for larger organisations. They're wanting to make changes to the scope of collective redundancy consultation, so it's dependent on the number of redundancies across the whole business, rather than at each establishment. And they want to enable employees to collectively raise grievances about conduct in their place of work, just in line with the current code of practice that's in place for individual grievances. And they want to tackle the access to work backlog. So access to work is that external body that helps facilitate an employee that has a disability to return to the workplace. They are able to provide an element of funding to the employer for helping make those reasonable adjustments. And so they want to tackle that backlog and to support employees that have a disability back into work. They want to look at reforming the apprenticeship levy, including giving employers flexibility to use 50% of the funds towards existing staff and in the creation of a growth and skills levy. And they want to create a fair pay agreement to allow sectorial collective bargaining in adult social care. So I don't know if any of you on the webinar operate in the adult social care sector, but that's something specific to you. So there's a lot in the manifesto, and there's a lot that's in the King's Speech. And also, unfortunately, we still have further legislation to come into force in the coming weeks. And so I just thought it's a perfect opportunity on this webinar just to remind you of what's coming in. So I guess there's one element of good news in terms of legislation coming in. It was announced Thursday last week that the Workers' Predictable Terms and Conditions Act is no longer coming into force. That was all about allowing workers and employees the ability to ask for that stable employment. What Labour are keen to do is, obviously they're looking at reforming how zero-hour contracts are working and the predictability of giving work. They want to focus on that, so it's an alternative way of this piece of legislation, what that would have done. But from the 1st of October, if you work in the industry where you receive gifts, tips, gratuities and service charges in terms of the nature of the business, then there's the Employment Allocation and Tips Act 2023. And if employees are awarded tips on more than an occasional basis, there's a requirement for you to have a policy on that. 26th of October is when the Worker Protection Amendment of Equality Act of 2010 comes into force. That will place a new legal duty on all employers to take preventative steps in preventing sexual harassment during the course of employment. And during the course of employment isn't just during the 9 to 5 hours, you know, your traditional on-site. It can feed over into like out of work, so like social events, work events, off-site client events and things like that. So that's coming in at the end of October. And then in April, so obviously that's now looking at next year, we've not heard anything to say it's not happening, but the Neonatal Care Leave and Pay Act comes into force. It's been a piece of law for 18 months, even maybe 2 years, but it's just never had a commencement date. And there's it's always been suggested that it's going to be April next year. And then just before the Conservative government left power, they fast-tracked the Paternity Leave Bereavement Act through Parliament and got it passed as an act. So that is still on the table. What happens next and when, who knows, but I just wanted to highlight that for you. But certainly just keep note of the 1st of October if you operate in that sector where tips are used, and obviously for all employees or employers, the 26th of October is a key date. So just a couple of other areas I thought you might be interested in, tribunal fees. So earlier this year, the Conservative government launched a consultation in which it was seeking views on their proposal to increase or introduce a fee for employees to submit a tribunal application. So the fee would be £55. Now, interestingly, those of you that remember, we used to have fees. I can't remember, in the hundreds, I think, 200 or 300, correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, but significantly more than that. But it was found to be unlawful because it prevented justice for workers to get justice to their employment and lawful employment practices. So there wasn't anything mentioned in the King's speech on this, but what we do know at the time that it was introduced by the Conservatives and put forward as a consultation, the Labour government were in principle in agreement with it. They were in agreement with the impact assessment that the Conservative Party had carried out as part of the process to propose a new fee. And I think the logic at the time, or the thoughts at the time, was the fact that it was a nominal fee, £55, and actually it is considered fair because of it needing to cover the administration of dealing with a claim. Whether that's still their view, I don't know, but I just thought I'd let you know what that situation is, because the talk was that the tribunal fees would kick in from November. So we're probably going to hear something very, very soon. And then just finally on the back to work and the reforms of the fit notes. If you remember, under the Conservative government, they wanted to reform the fit note process. So, for example, instead of it sitting with a GP to produce, it would be delegated to other professionals, such as pharmacists, for example. the Labour government haven't said anything about what the Conservatives were proposing, but what we do know from their manifesto and their King's Speech and other communications is that they are committed to tackling the access to work backlog, which I mentioned a few moments ago. So it's about improving access to reasonable adjustments and supporting employees that do have disabilities into the workplace. So that's where they're coming from on that perspective. I don't expect them to be reforming who signs off fit notes, but certainly they want to get people back into work, and they'll be looking at the access to work scheme. So before we take your questions, so we're coming to the end, I just wanted to run 3 more polls, and just out of interest, will your organisation be impacted by the TUPE Act? And if so, do you have a policy in place?
Okay, I'll close and share those.
Oh, I don't think I've seen a poll result like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to the next one.
We'll move on. So as an organisation, have you started preparing for that new legal duty that's going to be placed on you to prevent sexual harassment during the course of employment?
Okay, I will close and share those results.
Oh, great that quite a lot of you have started preparing. That's great news. Okay, and 64% haven't. So obviously we've always had harassment laws in place. There's obviously this further duty that if an employer is found to be in breach of, then it can impact on awards that are made at tribunal. But perhaps if we run the second poll, that will help with understanding what kind of things you can be doing to prepare.
Okay, we will close that one out.
Okay, great to see that you've got many or all of these to some extent, varying levels. I would say the key thing is your risk assessment, because if you don't undertake a risk assessment, you don't know what the risk is, and therefore you don't know what measures you need to put in place to prevent sexual harassment. So it's fantastic that 16% of you have got and carried out a risk assessment for the prevention of it. But I would strongly recommend over the coming weeks that if you haven't done it, then you do look at doing that. What else have we got? So most of you got the bullying and harassment policy. That's brilliant. Again, if you don't have anything, then that's definitely something that you'll need, because ultimately the duty on the prevention of it isn't just going to rely on one initiative that you have in place. It will be the culture of your organisation and how you work towards preventing it.
Yeah, and I think it's also calling it out specifically, the sexual harassment in your bullying and harassment policy. So even if you've got one already, it's just making sure that it's been enhanced to cover the additional duty, and make it clear that your additional processes such as the risk assessment, etc., are built into that policy.
Yeah. If just on that, we are going to be making available a free online tool actually in the coming weeks around an audit. of existing work practices, so that would be a good starting point. If you are a user of our knowledge base, or even if you're one of our clients, then your consultant will be in touch with you, or the knowledge base will have your bullying and harassment policy, risk assessment, etc. So yeah, so there's lots of tools we're trying to make available to everyone. And obviously training, that is fundamental as well. And there was a case ruling, wasn't there, about 18 months ago that specifically was to do with quality training, and actually it shouldn't become stale. It has to be an ongoing, regular thing. So
that's where e-learning can help. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say it's brilliant that you're all doing something to some extent, but they're definitely the key activities. Okay. And then I think that's over to the questions.
It is.
Before we wrap up.
A really, really good question here.
Oh, go on.
So it is there business and industry consultation when creating the new bills? Because I have to say, it does feel like it's particularly biased towards the employee. It feels like there's a lack of consultation. I mean, there is a whole process, isn't there?
It is. It's interesting because Labour specifically have said, and I can't remember which of their several documents, but they will consult with businesses and unions. So I suspect the union thing is they're already doing behind the scenes, aren't they? With businesses, then I'm trying to think that they would open a public consultation, wouldn't they? So the things that we share in our newsletters each month about new consultations that are opening, they're the kind of things that employers then have the opportunity to feed into. But yeah, I mean, we're running out of time in terms of initiating bills.
Absolutely.
At what point do you? Yeah.
I mean, they do put out consultation, don't they? Because we feature it in our newsletter every month when there's something we think could be of interest to our clients and our readership. We will say there's a link here if you want to contribute to the consultation on specific things. And there is a on the government site you can register, can't you, or keep it pinned so that you can check when anything comes in. It's massive. It's consultation on a wide range of bills, not just employment related, but we just pick out the ones that we think will have a significant impact on our readership. But yeah, it does happen. It's just it just feels as though there's a strong voice here.
It is interesting. I know I've responded. I responded on the holiday pay consultation, the holiday calculations, because that is a bugbear of mine. But so there are. I mean, it's all on their website about the bills, and it gives you a clear link to how you can engage with it and put your views in, as an employer, as an employee, as a professional body, if you're working for a professional body.
Yeah, they do work with professional bodies, in particular trade associations that are impacted. So the TIPS one, would have been consulted with the relevant trade associations before they finalised that. So yeah, there is quite wide consultation. But
thinking of that, TIPS is a good one because ACAS. Was it ACAS or was it the government? There's a code of practice drafted, and that code of practice went out to a public consultation. So even though the act had been passed, the code was then drawn up on the back of that piece of legislation having been passed, and then obviously subject to people contributing the views, and then it published an updated version. So it can happen that way round, thinking through that example. Yeah.
But that's all the questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. So just to sort of bring the webinar to a close, just to let you know a few things. We offer HR knowledge base, obviously, along with all our other services like retainer clients, helpline, etc. The knowledge base is where you can get all and download our templates, policy articles on the entire life cycle and manage it yourself. So there's a link there, which you'll get a copy of the slides later. We offer training, of course, ILM 3 and 5, which are those accredited training schemes, and then all our other soft skills are CPD points. But yeah, managing disciplinary, appraisal. So there's a wide range of training, and if perhaps there's something that's quite specific to your industry, then we can look at tailoring it. So our webinar schedule is up and running through to December. We've got a January one we're adding, which is all about strategic planning and how you can prioritise, etc. for the year ahead. We're in the process of writing the new schedule at the moment. So if you do want to feed back to us topics that you'd like to see covered, particular areas, do get in contact, because we're really keen to develop a programme that is what you want. But for the rest of the year, what we have is next month is about understanding risk when managing people. So we will touch on that new duty to prevent sexual harassment, along with all other risks that are associated, tribunal claims, etc. And then November, in readiness for the festive season, we're going to do a session on work-related functions and events. And then the December one is all about the year ahead. What can we see? We'll know a lot more at that point, but also we'll pick up on any relevant case rulings that we know are due to be published in the future, and just talk through those as well. So do sign up for our webinars, and as I said, any feedback in terms of titles and content, do let us know. And here's the link to the next webinar, which is 10th of October, 10 o'clock till 11. So you can use a QR code there to book your place. And then if you're not aware, we, several of us within HR Solutions carried out research and produced a HR white paper, Strategic HR Thinking, Aligning People and Business Strategy. So Sue and I have both contributed to that, along with colleagues. It's available to you all free download. So do take a look, because that's looking at the future of HR from a more strategic business strategy perspective. And one final poll, and that is really if you'd like us to get in touch with you on the back of today's webinar about any of our services, whether it's about HR consultancy, helpline, retainer client training, payroll, health and safety, you let us know and we can get in contact with you. Keep that open for a few more moments.
Okay, I'll close that for you.
Thank you. And really, just to say thank you to everybody for joining us. Sorry to have overrun just by 4 minutes though, but thank you. There's a lot to go through, and if you've got any questions or want to speak to us on anything, please do get in touch. Thank you, Sue, for helping on running the webinar as well this morning. And
thank you.
I hope to see you all next month. Thank you.
Thank you.